Hi, this is Josh Marshall, and this is the Josh Marshall podcast featuring Kate Riga. We are coming to you on Wednesday, January 28th, Wednesday, our normal recording time. And we've had a lot of news since we were with you last. We have what you certainly know about the shooting murder of Alex Pretti, this VA ICU nurse in Minneapolis. We've all seen the videos and know the outlines of what happened there. And as you know, this has triggered something that is kind of new in Trump's second term. Um, they are in a certain kind of retreat now. Um, they are trying to have it be something Trump is very familiar with, kind of a rebranding or something that seems like they're shifting gears, but without actually shifting gears. They dropped Greg Bovino. Still a little unclarity about exactly what's going on with him, but it sounds, he lost his fake title, Uber commander of Customs and Border Control, sent back to El Centro in Southern California. Um, there's some level of feeding frenzy. Is Kristi Noem going to lose her job? I think we know that even what is it? Even back a few months ago, Trump made a few sounds like maybe I'm done with her. Uh, Noem leaking about Stephen Miller. So all these things are happening right now, and as I've written about, many people have written about, many people at TPM have written about. They hit a point the beginning of this week where even the most diehard kind of Trump people just couldn't manage to get behind. Yes, he was a mass shooter, domestic terrorist, and you see the video. And now we are in this situation where we don't, it's very much in flux. I think Trump is trying to say like, oh yeah, Greg Bovino, he was a little feral. Send in Tom Homan, Tom Solid. But obviously, they don't want anything to change. They just Trump just realized that like you couldn't own this one. You couldn't. They kind of managed the Renee Good thing, kind of like, oh yeah, her car and all this kind of stuff, because she was driving the car. Uh, I mean, that was ridiculous too. But this one was too much, and Trump realized no one was going to own this, and he needed to do something. So now we're in this period where we're trying to find out whether or not they can, you know, make uh, make some noises about, oh, we had some bad people in charge and now we're going to put good people in charge and it'll be awesome, without actually changing anything. And whether or not that happens will be determined by how quickly the opposition sort of runs at what is basically a retreating army, right? When they're trying to get their stories together, they're trying to they're trying to run away from the current situation and find some new position to hold on to. And when that happens in a military context, your army needs to chase a retreating army as fast as possible and make it a disorderly retreat. And now that is what we are, the outcome of that is what we are in the process of finding out, both on the public airwaves, in on Capitol Hill, and unfortunately for Trump, and unfortunately for the Republicans in the Senate, this blow up came exactly when they're trying to refund the Department of Homeland Security. It's not a great time for them to do that vote. And as I'm sure some of you saw, you had a handful of centrist. Centrist frontline Democrats, I think it was seven, Kate can correct me if I'm wrong, who voted for the bill in the House. And a lot of them, like a day later, had to put out statements saying, like, oh, I was so wrong. Please forgive me. So all of that is in flux. We really don't know how this is going to play out. And it's you have certain political moments where the entrenched, stalemated positions kind of shake free a bit, and you don't know if that stalemate, that sort of you know, those sort of hardened World War I like trench warfare lines are going to reestablish themselves, or something new is going to come up. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Um, Kate, what do you make of all of this?
So I think the optimistic take is we found out that the Trump administration is not actually immune to political gravity. The getting rid of Bovino, maybe getting rid of Nome. Nome is trying to shield herself by throwing Stephen Miller in front of her. Stephen Miller is trying to shield himself by throwing CBP in front of him. CBP is reportedly mad at ICE. Like, this is all the behavior of people who think a scalp is going to be required, who are worried that Bovino's scalp is not going to be enough.
Yeah,
Um, you have Tillis and Murkowski kind of calling for Noam's ouster directly, which is maybe not shocking given they're kind of the
they're sort
usual
of already on the
suspects.
outs. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But you even have MAGA Republicans kind of now singing from the same songbook in terms of we need a real investigation. This is not okay. And for Trump, too, that is a degree of pushback from kind of institutional Republicans we just have not seen yet. So I think it is worth kind of pausing and recognizing that that is a pretty enormous political win, and that it was brought about almost solely by normal people who have been so strikingly brave and are putting their bodies on the line, and recording. If we didn't have video of these shootings, I don't think this would be the reaction at all. Um, so it's a long war, but it's worth appreciating that a battle was won here. Like, the Trump administration at least feels the need to create an appearance of de-escalation, and that's
Yep,
not nothing.
yep.
Now, the cynical side of that coin is kind of what you talked about at the beginning, which is there is some amount to which this is, musical chairsing who's in charge of the crackdowns more than it is any kind of fundamental change in the crackdowns themselves, because fundamentally Trump can't change that. He can't kind of rein in ICE or have them stop treating blue cities like occupied territory in a war, because that is the whole thesis of his administration. If you get rid of that, what's left? It's tariffs and building the ballroom and invading Greenland. Like, he needs the head knocking part because that's what Republicans want. Um,
Right.
so you don't want to be too cheerful about the retreat, because you just don't want to delude yourself that we're going to see some kind of huge change in behavior. But it's important in a time where Trump wants to feel like an inevitability that we recognize that normal people changed the tide here, and that it might result in at least ICE being, kind of chased out of Minneapolis. That's no small thing, even if they relocate to their next place. So I think that's kind of the state of things. And what's will be most interesting kind of coming next, I think, is where we end up on the congressional side of this, which we'll get into in detail. But what kind of reforms are going to actually be on the table? Like, Republicans are spooked. They recognize that they have to be seen, you know, lobbying for some kind of restraints put on this agency. And now the question is that going to be window dressing, right? Is it just going to be like more money for body cameras or something? Or is it going to be,
Hmm.
you can't wear masks anymore. You have to wear a badge, something that would be a little bit more meaningful within the constraints of course, Republicans are not going to say we're getting rid of ICE, right? Like, we have to live in the
Right.
world we're living in. But what does that look like?
Yeah, well, let me ask you one question, and this is a big question, but before we get into other stuff, what is your sense of why did this incident? Why was it this incident? Why are we here? Why did this incident create the last 72 hours when, on the one hand, like, Jesus, Josh, how could it not? But like, they, shot a woman in the face. What was that, a month ago now? Like, that was, it's hard to say that wasn't just as bad. So what is your sense of why are we here now?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this. Okay, I think part of it is Renee Good was a woman and was a pretty, like, visibly gay woman, and so
Hmm.
that kind of, as horrible as it is, lowers her stock. I
Hmm.
think the administration was a little bit better able, as you alluded to muddy the waters around what she was doing with her car in a way that just was not possible with the Preddy execution, because there's no angle of a video that, gave even the slightest bit of credence to he was fighting back at all, right? And then I think the third point, and this is, our colleague John Light and I were kind of talking about this piece, the fact that Preddy was armed and that the administration coalesced in that initial moments around that as justification for him to be killed. Um, that was kind of the impetus of the right wing backlash. And I feel about this a little bit that it's a convenient foothold for right-wing groups to kind of use, and politicians to use, because you can say, like, "Oh, I'm just a second amendment warrior," kind of thing, and
Yeah.
you don't
Yeah.
have to kind of contradict the administration in a more direct way. But, whether serious conviction or convenience, it was a toehold for people to kind of oppose the killing right out of the gate. Um,
Right.
so I think it's all of those things, and then combined with the fact he could not be a more sympathetic person to have been killed. An ICU nurse in the VA hospital. He was on film kind of trying to help a woman when he, gets tackled. I think, again, the fact that she was in a car and that he is not also makes him just look so much more vulnerable. So and I just think also it's the second time it happened in 3
Yeah.
weeks. So
Yeah. No.
there's no kind of, "Oh, it's an aberration, it's one bad apple," right? It just sends the message pretty clearly that right now we're on schedule for every 2 to 3 weeks, an American citizen will be gunned down on the street, right?
Yeah. I have also, wondered which of these things it is. There's a part of there is something about the gun part of this that I thought you were going to say, and you made it a different point. But a related point there is that they came out first. He was brandishing his gun. He was about to shoot, and they shot him. And that, that sort of, that was their story. They committed to that story. And like, imagine another scenario where they never said that. They just said, "Hey, the guys, the ice guys saw he had a holster and he had a gun." And once he started, moving around to protect the woman, they thought he might be going for his gun. And that is a different kind of that wouldn't have been justification, but that's a different scenario where I think people might say, well, okay, maybe they thought he was going for his gun or something like that. That was not the story they universally committed to. He's out there, he pulls a gun on them, and what are they going to do? And you see the video and you're like, he like no. Like what you said is totally fake. He never did that. We obviously found out subsequently, or pretty quickly, that by the time they shot him, they had taken his gun from him. This is uncontested. And so I think, one part of it is they staked out a sort of wild position. It was immediately just totally contradicted, you know, nothing there. And as you said, it's also kind of like it's the second time. And I do think, well, it's the second time, and there's one other part of this that I think is worth considering, and that is that, uh we had people like us were really upset about the Renee Good thing. We know that. there was a big public argument about it. Now we have the second time, and now everybody's like, oh, okay, that's enough. But if you actually look at public opinion in the various ways you can measure public opinion, people around the country were really freaked out and angry about what happened to her. And they kept getting more angry as they saw more stuff over the last month in Minneapolis. So I think my point here is that there is a way in which news junkies get plugged into this national conversation, which is defined by the cable TV networks, the big websites, the big newspapers. And there you kind of have a sense of like, well, some people think this, some people think that. But that's not actually what's happening. People were really, really fucking angry about what happened to her. And I think you see it again and it just busts through. So there's all these different aspects of what happens, and then suddenly you see like you have this was the big thing to me. I mean, you had main for lack of a better word, mainstream Republicans, which now means like hardcore Trumpers, putting out statements that were thoughts and prayers, but and not saying anything confrontational, but sort of like, oh yeah, that's I don't like that. Let's try to kill a few less people. They can't quite get there. But yeah, it's one other thing I saw in the aftermath of this. I saw an interview with Ted Cruz, and he was actually going back to the Renee Good thing. And I think probably a lot of people have seen this, but he basically says, "Look, when something like that happens, you come out, you know, I mean, so to speak, come out guns blaring, saying she's a domestic terrorist. That's gonna just bum people out. Like, you can't do that. Like, you can't, you can't be saying it's awesome. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe the ICE agents shouldn't be prosecuted, but you can't be saying this obviously kind of harmless, let's be honest, white woman is because she's not. And you say that, and you're no one is going to believe you. So you can kind of see that everything was pretty stretched thin already based on what happened to Renee Good, and they kind of couldn't get there again. Couldn't summon the couldn't get the lie machine to work in the same way for a second time.
And I think it's just Americans are used to a certain type of law enforcement brutality, which is, police kill people pretty routinely here, especially compared to our peer nations. But we know the script when that happens, right? The department puts the officer on administrative leave, or, at least says they are. Says, they're going to do an investigation. It's somber, right? You you don't necessarily go all the way to like, it's a tragedy, but it's at least it's regrettable, right?
Yeah,
Which I
yeah.
think a lot of people find unbearably insufficient, right? And a lot of times those investigations are half-assed or not done at all, and we all know about the police who kind of do something so horrible, and then you look back and find out they have this, rap sheet of being horrible shitty people forever. But there is at least a script that you follow when that happens, and you expect to see, the police chief kind of doing a press conference in a funereal atmosphere, at least some nodding in the direction that it's a
This isn't
profound
ideal.
thing to take a human life, right?
Yeah.
um I People are just not used to the kind of edge lord far right thing of, the Jonathan Ross who killed Renee Good saying, fucking bitch, and afterwards, and then seeing, one of the still nameless killers of Alex Pretti clapping afterwards, and then counting the bullet holes in the back of his body, and mind you, fleeing the scene. Tim Wall still doesn't know the names of the agents who killed Pretti. We are just so far from that script that I think if the administration wasn't so kind of insulated in its own bubble of people, they would at least do window dressing to stay closer to those rhythms so it wouldn't alarm people so much. And I think that's a big reason why people are like total normies are so freaked out because even if you hate the police, you're not really accustomed to seeing them openly celebrating after they
Or
kill
their
people.
bosses openly
Right.
celebrating.
Right.
As you said, it's the police chief that you at least expect to say, "Oh, this is, maybe not a tragedy, but like,
Unfortunate,
it's very
regrettable.
regrettable, and we're gonna and you when there is a cover up or a whitewash, it is, well, if you look closely, it looked like he might be pulling a gun, and that classic thing that maybe it wasn't great, but you weren't there in that police officer's need to make a split second decision, and it's very sad, and it's sad for the victim's family, but like, this is police work and you need to make sudden whatevers. And yeah, that thing of making, because the thing is, it is inherently hard to put yourself in the, you can say like, dude, I watched the video, I don't, this guy didn't need to make a split second decision, but you don't know the person, you don't know how they got up in the morning. It's an inherently very subjective thing, and that is different from when the, again, not just the police officers, but the people in charge, the people who are supposed to kind of, you know, uh, have some communications people who tell them to sort of like at least act somber, right? Even if you don't care, have those people say things that are just absurd on their face. The guy's sitting there with an iPhone. Like, don't tell me he was about to like you either believe that or that freaks you out or you get angry. Like, don't lie to me. Don't say something stupid. I'm not an idiot, right? Um, and then just that it's awesome. Yeah. But I think I mean, some of that, as we know, is that the people who run things in this administration are, out of the 4chan, 8chan, edge lord, uh, that whole thing. But I think the other part of it is that if you need to sustain the idea that Minneapolis is this out of control place where corrupt liberal politicians are allowing illegals to terrorize the community, and the community is sort of, uh, won't speak up because of Antifa, all the woke liberals and all this kind of stuff, that you kind of, basically, I guess what I'm saying is, the fact that you were sending 3,000 ICE and CBP people in there is already based on the idea this is like a hellhole, and it's a war zone. It's a war zone. So you kind of, there's a part of it where you kind of have to say that, right? So some of it is not just, I think, not just that they are in that kind of great replacement, Haitians eating your cat sort of world, that this sort of um, hyperbolic binary view of things is embedded in the original deployment, right? So to me, it's
Which
both.
also which also makes the Minnesota response, I think, so effective. The the performative nonviolence of it all.
Hmm.
How kind
Hmm.
of whistles are their big, weapon of choice. Um using really really normal people who are like all bundled up in their winter coats and stuff,
Hmm.
um as with their faces out, and compared to the ice people who are like cosplaying in military fatigues, that is also part of it. That we're watching ice, murder people while everyone around them is acting so conspicuously peaceful. And I think that is worth calling out because it entails an enormous amount of discipline. Um, it reflects the training that a lot of these people have had from these kind of disparate network of like little community support groups. Um, and there's just something really profound to me about watching your neighbors get shot in the head and responding to that by refusing to lift a hand um while you're like defending your neighbors. I mean, it's the whole kind of thesis of why the civil rights movement worked so well, but when you're dealing in the world of kind of politics and optics, like the clash of those two groups, I think is pretty moving.
Yeah, no, and I mean, first of all, yes, and this takes it takes a lot of training, a lot of discipline, a lot of organization. People don't, as you say, people in the same way that an army, what is so important about good discipline in an army is that people, you see people firing guns at you, you want to run, right? There's a lot of there are a lot of there are lots of very human instincts that good order and discipline in an army is meant to control those instincts, because you're in an army, the other side's shooting you, you can't run. Often you have to run into it, so you need anybody who studies military training will tell you that one of the big things that they are always trying to do in a military context is you don't not run because of America or free and fair elections. You don't run because there's a guy next to you and you don't want to bail out on him. You've got a relationship with your little group, and you don't want to let them down. There is something very similar here of you don't, some ice guy like wails on you, you're like, fuck you, dude. Like I don't know, hit him over the head or something, right? So there's a lot of training and discipline and self-discipline that goes into this. This isn't accident, this is not an accident that there's so much, as you said, sort of performative nonviolence. And it's not just a performance when the other side is being violent, right? It's you have to keep it real. There's actually, it is very interesting. One thing, I guess it was over the weekend, maybe Sunday, maybe Monday, as the administration line was sort of fragmenting, sort of coming apart. What I noticed is there were a bunch of people on Twitter, a lot of people in the sort of the orbit of the right wing people in Silicon Valley, basically saying, quoting, people who did urban warfare in Baghdad 20 years ago. These special ops people saying, "Oh, I see it now. This is just like in Iraq. You've got spotters, you've got you have specialized training. Basically, this is an insurgency. This isn't organic. There's training here. They have specialized roles, all this kind of stuff." And it was funny because, like, you're right, they do. They do. They're organized. They have a plan. They are trying to defeat this, and they can do that because they're not using violence. But it was interesting to me, just in the sense that you see one side's arguments kind of falling apart, and you're looking for a new argument, right? Um, but there is just this. It's an interesting thing because so much of MAGA is, there was this golden age of robust and self-protecting communities where, you knew, you looked out for your neighbors, and all this kind of MAGA imagined past communalism. And it's because and it's based on ethnic purity and ideological purity. But what you've seen in Minneapolis is, it's the it's the Minneapolis people who are looking out for their neighbors, and often neighbors they don't even know, right? People in their community, and risking their lives, and not risking their lives in some like theoretical way. Like you can do this kind of just, anti-ICE organizing work and get murdered. We've seen it happen. And you have the contrast of that with, the ICE masks and that kind of like, we're used to seeing police and police type people being violent, but here there is it is a particularly chaotic and undisciplined kind of violence, and where you see the people in charge of ICE coming forward and saying, "Oh, he was about to kill us," and you're like, "Dude, we saw that." So sort of like taking care of your community and being there for people who live near you versus anger and violence and lying. It's not surprising. People look at this, even a kind of a broad cross section of the American population, say like, "Damn, what the fuck? Like, how is this happening?"
So let's talk about the congressional side of this, which one of the greatest kind of ironies of this whole situation is that the Trump administration decided to kind of rev up the violence in Minneapolis during the 30 seconds that congressional Democrats have pretty significant leverage. To catch anyone up who hasn't been following this, the House passed a package of, well, technically five in one, but basically six spending bills, to keep the government open. It was mostly on a glide path, even though all but seven House Democrats voted against the DHS funding bill, which obviously includes ICE. Um, that happened a day or two before Pretti was murdered. Then that changed everything in the Senate, and Schumer came out and said, we're not passing a DHS bill without restrictions on ICE. Um, and that has left the Senate in a bit of a sticky wicket because the government will shut down Friday at midnight. Um, the other five bills are pretty, uncontroversial. They would pass with broad support. But as to the DHS one, the situation they're in now, Democrats want it separated from the others and basically changed, and add in some restrictions. They still have not coalesced behind which reforms exactly they want, which I think is a little strange, but they want it taken out and worked on. And Schumer said on the floor yesterday, if we do it that way, we'll pass the other five. 96% of the government is funded. So you'd have a quote unquote partial shutdown, but it's just, the one agency.
And what are the
Um,
other five bills? Like, what are the like?
I don't know.
What are those? Okay, let's just cut that. Let's cut that part
Yeah.
out, Jackie.
Um, so
Doesn't matter.
so the sticking points now are, if they say Democrats are successful in getting that bill siphoned off, which would require unanimous consent to do it before the Friday deadline. So one Republican senator could derail it, which is a big problem because, some of the hardcore MAGAs don't want to do this. But if they were able to separate it, figure out whatever reforms everyone can agree on, do it. Then the House has to come back to repass it because it's different than the legislation they passed. The House is on recess until next week. So, not non-circumventable. You can force these people to like come into work, but then you also need Mike Johnson to be willing to do that. And a concern here is that any new DHS bill with any amount of reforms is not going to pass the House, right? Where the margins are so slim, and Democrats are really wary of getting together on the Senate, saying, we'll pass everything else. We kind of take away the leverage of a shutdown, and then have a bill get stuck in the House. And Republicans are saying, well, Trump will back it. He'll kind of uh, strong arm the House into passing it, but Democrats aren't really satisfied with that either. And then what that leaves you with is Republicans have been floating some non-legislative reforms right through executive actions, and Democrats have flatly said, no, we don't trust you, right? Trump will break his word. And then the stance of Senate Republicans has basically been, let's pass all six, and then we'll kind of do some standalone reform bills separate from the funding stuff. And again, Democrats are like, that's not going to pass the House. Also, their big leverage here is the shutdown, right? The pain of the
Right,
shutdown. So you take
right,
that
right.
away, what incentive is there?
Right.
So it's kind of difficult to see how this resolves right now, because anything absent Democrats kind of caving and saying, like, okay, fine, we'll vote for it, requires a lot of kind of next steps, and the House is looming as this big kind of source of uncertainty.
So let me see if I understand this. That basically, Democrats are worried that they have a deal. They pass five of the bills. They they make they make some changes on the DHS bill, and now it goes back to the House, but maybe the House doesn't pass it. So like you have a DHS shutdown, but the Democrats have then kind of given up most of their leverage, basically.
Right. And that's a fight maybe that they're okay having, saying like we desperately want to reform ICE. It's bad enough that some Republicans want to reform ICE, but then ultimately it's Republicans who are preventing that from happening. They're shutting down DHS. And there's other kind of sweeteners in that bundle, right? Like FEMA
Hmm.
is under DHS. You could
Right,
have kind
right.
of a smaller scale shutdown pain from just the one agency.
Well, I imagine too that with DHS, at least some of DHS stuff would probably come under the emergency exceptions to a shutdown. So like
Yeah.
you could have like a DHS shutdown, but ICE and CBP would be like they'd be still going. So probably in a sense, the administration would be like, cool, we have a nominal DHS shutdown. You've lost your leverage.
Yeah.
Sucks to be
And
you.
the central point here is also like ICE still has that enormous slush fund from the big beautiful bill. So like this is not meaningfully going to change anything really.
Right.
But I think Democrats feel like they have to kind of be caught fighting at this point. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think it's not insignificant to at least start kind of sketching out what you want to happen to ICE when you take
Mm-hmm.
power again, because that's something
Mm-hmm.
Democrats are going to have to be able to run on. And they have not figured out that position beyond being afraid of saying abolish. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know, I think good kind of toehold to form there too. And, as of now, we're talking Wednesday, mid afternoon. And as far as we know, Thune is still going to keep all these bills together, which means they're not going to pass, which means there is going to be a full shutdown. At least, that's where we are right now. We have not landed on any off ramp that seems viable. So, that then we're raising the specter of a full government shutdown over ICE extrajudicial killings,
Yeah, I mean,
which
it
is a
does.
fight I think Democrats want to
Yeah,
have.
yeah. It is interesting that there was that in the I think within a few hours of Alex Pretty's murder, you had Schumer saying, "Yep, no, we're not doing this." That was, and then since then, I've seen interviews with either Hakeem Jeffries or Chuck Schumer, where the kind of things where the kind of questions where you'd expect, well, we're going to get together and talk about it, but they're much more resolutely like, nope, like no, we're not doing this. So they clearly, whether it is a mix, whether it is that they think that the public's behind them or that their own partisans will not accept anything less. They seem pretty clear on that. And I guess what seems a little unrealistic to me is that and I think Politico had a piece referencing this, that the White House position seems to be okay. Everybody can kind of loosen up a bit on ICE. People can say you can say we need an investigation, we need a reset, or all these kind of things. But on the budget thing, it's iron discipline. You got to vote for it, and like that's hard to that's a tough that's a tough balance, right? Because if these things are, this isn't like your normal legislative legislative showdown where most people, even a lot of like highly political people, don't exactly understand how the Obamacare subsidies work and stuff like this, that people saw what happened and they know this is about what happened, and kind of like, yeah, it was terrible, and we're also going to give them all the money that they just asked for with no restrictions at all. That just I don't know how, you message that. So and again, as you
Yeah.
say, I think that Democrats are like, you want to shut it down, great, do it, we're ready.
Yeah, and to add into the mix, Schatz said last night, like, "I think we're gonna get there," and he wouldn't say any other details, but he, is on Democratic leadership, so I think a significant thing to say, and, maybe it comes out in the wash that the Senate's kind of like, "We do our job, and we kind of don't worry about whether or not it can pass in the House," say Democrats and Republicans do some kind of DHS reform bill and let there be some kind of, short-term DHS shutdown. Maybe you pass like a standalone FEMA funding bill or something, and kind of let the House be bedeviled by this. And then,
Hmm.
maybe they feel like that's enough for Senate Democrats to get to say, like, hey, we tried. Republicans are blocking this. I don't know. There just doesn't it's hard for me to see right now any realistic situation where like a ICE reform bill can actually become law at this point, but,
Hmm. Hmm. Well,
that's
let
where
me
we
ask
are.
you, do you have a sense, Kate, what okay, so what do you have a sense of, in among Senate Democrats, what are the range of things that would be that they would consider under the heading of ICE reforms? Do you know what are
They're
those?
they're being really tight-lipped about it. Like, they keep getting questions about this and just doing the whole, like, "Oh, we don't wanna negotiate in public" thing. And in some ways, this, like, shows, kind of shed some light on the earlier internecine stuff, that you have some Democrats who say, "Get rid of the whole department," some who wanna kind of go back to old school immigration enforcement where you have a contingent on the border, but like they're kind of specialists, right? And they're just working with the immigration courts, and it's a much
Right.
narrower thing. I mean,
Hmm.
some people want to get rid of DHS altogether. And then you have the really piddling stuff of like they need different training and, masks and body cams, as if like the whole kind of beating soul of the operation is not to, brutalize people.
Right.
Um, and I think that's part of why we're not getting like very many details at all because they know any slate of stuff people are going to get pissed about, right? It's either going to be much too small or you're not going to get Republican votes for abolish the agency. So,
Yeah, well, that's sort of Democrats inevitably are going to be negotiating with themselves, but you do have the sort of the backstop reality that you're not going to get to an agreement if your position is, yeah, let's get rid of ICE and like let's go back to the INS model from pre 2002, and that's it. And on the other hand, I mean, because I do think that it is getting close to a consensus position now among Democrats that you need to whether you call it abolish and create, recreate INS, or thoroughgoing reform that amounts to the same thing, right? That somehow or another, this thing is crooked and cannot be fixed. You need to, again, either abolish it and create a new thing or do some sort of reform so thorough, purging, blah, 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 blah. And Democrats also know, like, okay, that's not, maybe we get there in January 2029, but we're not gonna pull that off from the minority. So what could we get? And it would not be nothing to me if they got out of this. Don't You can't wear masks. You can't wear masks. You have to wear a badge. But uh, given what we've seen, given how how absolutely united Democrats are, and how angry the general public is, that does seem like, all right, I'm going to shoot you in the face, but you'll see my face before I shoot you, and you'll
yeah.
see my badge, right? So I get why it's a little hard to know quite what what your angle is, and that's why I almost wonder if it is a bet. Bill Kristol, everybody I've known Bill Kristol for a long time, but everybody rightly is still kind of jarred by how is Bill Kristol like one of our best spokespeople, right? But he said something a few days ago of like, you don't have to work it out. Just say no. No, we're not going to do it. We're not funding this. And I think the more pragmatic part of that, or the more kind of operational part of that, is, maybe the Democrats' position is, I don't, I have seen enough of you brutalizing American citizens and immigrant communities. And every couple weeks, you take some totally innocent person and like blow them away in cold blood on the streets. And I will not accept that. And you come up with the solution. I don't have to come up with the solution. This is unacceptable. You tell me what you are going to do where we don't have to see this stuff on our streets anymore. And that's sort of, I think politically
Mhm.
that's a pretty good that's a pretty good thing to say at a press conference, right? You
Totally.
figure it out. You made this problem. It's not up to us to sort of, come up with legislative language about like you can't be killing people all the time. You did this. You figure it out. And when you figure it out, like you come to us for our votes.
It'd be really cool if they could get some kind of like, you know, prosecutorial change where ICE is like vulnerable to, lawsuits in a way that they absolutely are not now. And, I haven't looked into it. I don't know how kind of deeply rooted the whole like you can't really do anything meaningful against federal agents is.
Pretty
Um
deep, I think. Yeah.
yeah, I think so too, but I don't know. That is you would think at least in the future where like more ambitious reforms are on the table that they have got to stop operating with impunity at the very least. Um
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. I mean, there's yeah, and look, but I think, and this goes back to some earlier points we were making, that you you assume, and you have the right to assume that criminal accountability is a fail safe several layers back. What you want is leadership who isn't getting these guys ramped up and feeling invulnerable and going out and shooting people. So, it's like, yes, you should have criminal accountability, but you should just have people in leadership who are, you know, it's several layers. And clearly
Yeah.
now we have people who like the leadership wants you to go out and like
Yeah. But I mean,
bust
you
skulls.
have to just cull. Like there's
Yeah.
two, everyone who's been recruited there, especially under Trump, are just completely unfit, right? So
Hmm.
anyway,
Hmm.
um, but so we're a couple days away. We'll see how that ends. I want to say before we move on to our last thing that something that has puzzled me for days now is if I want to run for the Democratic nomination for president in 2028, I'm on a flight to Minneapolis last week. Like I'm next to the protesters. I'm getting tear gassed, I'm maybe getting beat up by ICE. Like I have been baffled by the lack of that. Even if you don't want to kind of from a moral whatever, it's your job to serve the public way, like
Hmm.
purely optics, man. You get sprayed in the face by guys in ICE windbreakers, and like, there's your first campaign ad. I was there standing shoulder to shoulder, blah, blah, blah. And as far as I can tell so far, like, I think Seth Moulton went. Um,
Which is
what's his name?
ironic considering he's like we have often thought of him as from a very different posture within the
Yeah.
Democratic Party. Yeah, yeah,
Oh, Ro Khanna went.
yeah.
Raphael Warnock is the first kind of maybe 2028er who went to visit the memorial and stuff. And then you had this like delegation who tried to get into the ICE facility and were denied and had like a shadow hearing there. But
Hmm.
again, I'm saying like on the streets, like go out with people. I just think it's a totally bizarre missed opportunity, even from just a purely calculated standpoint, if not
Yeah.
to kind of like take your congressional cloak of protection and try to spread it around people who don't have that. But it's another data point that is worrying to me in terms of Democrat big D democratic behavior here has been driven by normal people. Like,
Mhm,
the
mhm,
quote unquote elites have been unmoved. Like, they were going to
mhm,
pass
mhm.
the ICE funding thing no problem until another murder made it absolutely untenable for them to do so. And so I don't know, we're what, a year into the term, and you're still not getting any sense that Democrats are rallying to fight under their own volition. It's still very
Mhm.
much like they have to kind of begrudgingly dragged into the fight when the tenor of public anger is so loud that they just can't ignore it anymore.
Right. I mean, I guess, at a certain well, I think there are a couple small possible explanations. I imagine that some governors might it's there is a way in which you could do that, right? You could go to a demonstration in Minneapolis, a Gavin Newsom, a JD Pritzker, or something like that, and people kind of like, "Oh, come on, man! Like this is our community's under siege, and you're here doing a photo op. Like so you need to, there's a I think that probably that might create a little trepidation. And I was going to say the situation has evolved pretty quickly, but actually, when I think about it, that's actually not true. It's been pretty evolved for a while now. So and it is ironic. You mentioned Seth Moulton. He has over the past number of years often been one of these guys who's looking for bipartisan coalitions and a lot of this kind of centrist positioning. So it is interesting how you have some people who sort of surprise you, who are just either their political antenna are better, or they just are really outraged by what they see. I guess at a certain level, I have accepted and am kind of celebrating that uh, it is ordinary people getting involved in organizing in groups like Indivisible and stuff like that, that they are pushing this forward and they're pulling the politicians along. And yes, I would like the politicians to be moving faster, but that is a in a lot of ways that is a surer that is kind of surer material to build something on, right? That so in a sense it doesn't in a sense it's not that bad to me, but I get exactly what you're saying, and I do think until I do think there has been a turning point in the last few days that up until very recently, certainly a lot of Democrats, but a lot of just press people and stuff were looking at this as like ICE is police. They don't work for your city police department, but they're police. They're another version of police. They're doing policing. Uh, uh, you know, Even though police are abusive, everybody wants there to be police. And I think even before this killing on Saturday, I think there was something shifting where people were like, "These are not police. This isn't policing. I see police. This is like kind of gangs of masked men who were like swarming people and dragging people out of their homes with warrants." So I do think that was another thing, kind of unfortunately holding some Democrats back, sort of like, you don't want to protest the police, and
I
and
think
ICE is the police.
my concern with the protest led thing is just most things are not going to break through the way that this
Hmm.
does. And if
Hmm.
you have
Hmm.
elites that are never willing to lead public opinion,
Yep.
um,
I
it's going to look
totally
like what it
agree.
did this
Yep.
year when you had so many kind of pitches sail by. Okay, so the last thing that we wanted to talk about is last night, Ilhan Omar was holding a town hall in Minneapolis. A man like lunged towards her with this vial of liquid that he, tried to spray on her. He was pretty quickly subdued by security that was there, and she finished her town hall. Trump said when contacted by an ABC reporter that she probably sprayed herself. She probably set it up, the attack herself. But part of the reason I wanted to mention this is there was another attack on a lawmaker that made almost no news. This was on Tu well, on Tuesday, a man was charged, for punching Maxwell Frost in the face. He had made comments to Frost and his friend. This is at the Sundance Film Festival. He said, "We're
Hmm.
gonna deport you and your kind." I guess he was yelling that to any, like, people of color who were there. Um, Pretty bad, a pretty weird thing that got, like, absolutely no attention. Again, it's all about if things are on video or not.
Yeah, I was gonna
The
say the same thing.
Ilhan
I was gonna
Omar
say the same
attack
thing.
was
Yep. Yep.
recorded, but
Yep.
so that brings us to a total of, in the past, like, couple weeks, 2, lawmakers of color, one of whom has been more genuinely grotesquely villainized by Republicans and this administration than anybody else. But who have been assaulted. As far as I can tell, in the Maxwell Frost situation, the guy who did it doesn't seem to have known that he was a lawmaker, which again is why I think it got a little less attention. This guy seemed to be trying to swing on any black people who were there.
Hmm.
And the one who kind of came for Omar, obviously she was, in her congressional duties at the
Yeah, giving
time.
a
So
speech. Yeah,
he
or
knew
yeah,
who she
town hall.
was. But
Yep.
um, you know, it feels like we are living through this spasm of, particularly right wing political violence that, you know, mass shooting a school is not enough to give you infamy anymore. And so all these people have kind of moved on to targeting, political people, whether that be politicians or, commentators or people in the space. So yeah, I don't know. No big conclusions about it. Just the all around sense of, I think, like, violence and brutality and impunity right now is also playing out in these kind of, in the threat to lawmaker realm, which has been just, exploding in the number they get all the time ever since Trump came on the scene.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I saw Frost's. I guess I don't know if I saw it on Blue Sky. I saw like a post from him, like, "Oh, I got punched in the face yesterday by by a guy who was pro-Trump or something like that." I also I had the same thought. Like, if that would have been video, then it's a story. But if it's not a video, it's kind of not a story. I mean, that is the flip side of what is most often a really positive thing, that, like, we know what happened to this Alex Pretty guy. We multiple videos from multiple angles. We saw what happened, and so it was, we know what happened. It wasn't forgotten. But when something is not videoed, it's almost as if it did not happen. This is kind of, I guess, neither here nor there with Ilhan Omar, but if you watch the video, it just gives you a sense of her, that the guy comes up, it looks like he's sort of spraying something on her. Two guys, one guy pushes him, and then another, like, sort of caricature bodyguard, like, locks arm around this dude and, like, like, flings him into the ground. But as that's happening, Omar's first response is like, "You want a piece of me?" Like, she comes at him, right? It just gives
She
you a
almost
sense of her.
swings on him. It's
Yes,
really
yes, yes,
awesome.
yes, yes. I mean, you get a this "let's do this" kind of energy from her, which again is not, uh we don't want elected officials to need to be rumbling with, like, potential assassins, or people who are just there to, like, be abusive or something. But gave me a bit of a flavor of her. And I think, again, in the last few days, you've had this sort of sea change where people are like, this is like a paramilitary. This is like MAGA's paramilitary organization that is, like, preying on this city. And I think when you rightly see it like that, you start thinking, when, like, when the president's paramilitary is out there going into a blue city and, like, kicking everybody's ass, not, doing a lot more than finding people who are undocumented, then everybody else who's MAGA starts feeling like it's Trump says it's open season. I can do what I want. I can get out there and get a piece of this myself. And that's what you're seeing. And in a certain sense, it kind of shouldn't surprise us. So yeah, and just to Kate and I are going to finish up here, but just to sort of bring this full circle, this is definitely a case where they are on the run. And that doesn't mean they're collapsing. It doesn't mean they want to change anything or are planning to change anything, but they have lost their footing. And when they've lost their footing, you need to be all over them in the political sphere, knocking them free of any new footing they may temporarily get a hold of. And you are also when you are in a situation where even like a lot of diehard Republicans, there's actually a congressman from Wisconsin, this guy Glenn Grothman, uh, and this guy is like, comically right wing, uber Trumpy, and he made a comment that was basically like, "Yeah, I think they gotta, they've got to get a handle on this at DHS. You can't have them doing these things where they're just like murdering a guy. And murder is a strong word, right? I don't even loosely I think that's what it is, but even in a polarized moment, we have to be careful about what we know and don't know. There's negligent homicide. When you have someone like that saying murder, you see that side has lost its footing, right? And so you need to um this is the time for everyone who opposes this kind of brutalization in the civic sphere to pour everything on, because when you have a retreating army, if they are followed closely and um, harassed in a metaphoric military sense, they can lose a lot of territory very quickly. And again, kind of back to what we discussed at the beginning of this episode, how this plays out is really in flux right now. Not just over the next year until November, not just over the next 3 years until we have a new president, but like in the next few days. So anybody who is, thinking, what can I do? What should I do? Whatever it is, do it. Get active. Call your member of Congress. All that kind of stuff. There's a lot that is very much fluid and up in the air right now, and a lot going on. Everybody who is out there, and I mean this really seriously, everybody who is out there doing this work of activism and observing and monitoring, be safe. I mean, good Lord, these people will kill you. We've seen it. It's terrifying that this is happening in the United States, and I think that's all we have for this week. Anything else, Kate?
Nope. See you next week.
See ya.
The Josh Marshall podcast is hosted by me, TPM reporter Kate Riga, and TPM founder, editor-in-chief Josh Marshall. The show is produced by Jackie Wilhelm. Thanks to Why Not Jansfeld for our podcast theme song, and thanks to all our TPM members who make this possible. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe wherever you listen.